Welcome to the podcast where mental health is at the core of what we focus on. We strive to develop people like you to maximize who you are and what you've been called to do by sharing tools and resources for better brain health. And now here's your host, Juan Garcia.
Hey there, we are going to talk about two deadly emotions to add to our series. And those are guilt and shame. Guilt and shame. These are two deadly emotions that are just those types of emotions that stay in our hearts and in our minds, and we harbor them for a good while. These are long-term emotions. Sometimes there's so many layers to them that we don't realize we really haven't gotten to the root of them and really deal with them the way we're supposed to. And because of that, there's resentment, there's bitterness, there's just negativity. And that's why these emotions are so deadly, because they have the power to really weigh us down and perpetuate negativity, especially in our minds, in our thought process, which in turn obviously affects our brain. Because remember, all of our thinking, all of our memories are physically engraved in our brains. In other words, they take up actual physical real estate in our brains. So the more we constantly think about the negative things and a sense of resentment, a sense of bitterness, guilt, and shame, the more those neural pathways in our brains are set, kind of like tire tracks when you just keep going over and over the same area, or like traffic patterns in your home, where you know if you were to remove a rug and see if there's hardwood underneath, and there is, you'll see where there's a lot more traffic areas because of the constant, back and forth, walking around, stepping on it, or the same area all over the place. And so that's the same effect that the constant thoughts that we have, good or bad, begin to build these neural pathways in our brains. And so obviously if they're negative, they're going to be harder to rewire when we realize that they're not good for us. If they're positive, then they're going to produce the positive chemicals, the neurotransmitters that we do want to benefit from, because they help us with happiness, with joy, with gratitude, and all of these positive emotions that we do want to experience on a long-term basis. So what is guilt? What is shame? What are the differences, and why are they so deadly? Well, let's start with guilt. Guilt is to be in a state of having done something wrong, or self-reproach. We feel bad. We feel guilty because of something that we did that we know was wrong. And a lot of times the reason why guilt is a deadly emotion is because we harbor that. We don't confess it. We don't deal with it. We don't tell someone. We're not held accountable for it. And so we're constantly living with this either obvious looking over our shoulders, or a subconscious or even sometimes unconscious sense of we're going to be caught, or someone will find out and we're going to get caught out there. It could be as serious as a crime, or it could be as little or less significant as a lie that we withheld from when we were younger, or something that happened to us when we were younger but we haven't told anyone, and because we don't want to get that person in trouble. So many little different things that it could be. And guilt is the emotion that is kind of being fed when we don't deal with it. In other words, it's one of those things that the more we don't deal with it, the more we feed the guilt. I hope that makes sense, because I know that the natural thing would be to say, well, as long as we don't feed it, it's okay. No, guilt is not one of those emotions that you don't want to feed, because when you don't feed it, in other words, when you ignore it, it just compounds. It just makes it worse, because the longer it takes for you to actually deal with it, the more it builds with time, like interest. So guilt is one of those emotions that you want to feed. And how do you feed it? Well, you feed it with dealing with it, with confessing. And, that could be someone that's trustworthy. It could be a therapist, a psychologist, a counselor, someone that you can go to in confidence, a pastor, a priest, whoever your spiritual authority figure may be. It could be a really close best friend that you trust, depending obviously on what it entails, but you do want to get that out of your system so that it's not harboring and it's not eating away with your sense of self-esteem. Because guilt, it's the reason why guilt can be present is because we feel like we kind of violated our own standards, our own core values, and so we're guilty. We find ourselves feeling guilty. Oh man, I shouldn't have done that. Why did I entertain that? Why did I even go there? Why did I say that? Why did I hold that in? All of these different things that we kind of overthink and think about, those lead to this sense of feeling guilty. And when we don't let that out and confess it, we have perpetual weight on our shoulders. We tense up, we're stressed out, and later on we'll talk about what are some of the illnesses and diseases that are developed because of guilt. Now, that's guilt. Its first cousin is shame. And shame is one of those emotions that also has that heavy negative connotation where with time, it also bogs us down. And it's that ultimate downward spiral negative thinking that we constantly just feel dirty. We feel awful. We feel like we let people down. We let ourselves down. And so we feel shame. And the biggest difference between the two, guilt and shame, is guilt is something that we actually did that we feel bad for. Shame is what we think we look like in front of others, or the loss of respect that we feel we've lost from people because of what we did or said. And so it could be more of something that we think about that is potentially there, but guilt is actually something that we did that we feel bad about. So that's a big difference. Another difference between guilt and shame is that shame overwhelms us with sadness, with deep sorrow. We don't like how we feel because of how we feel we're perceived by others. Guilt, on the other hand, has the potential to develop anger. And so if you ever deal with someone that is constantly upset and constantly just irritable, and there's a great chance that they're dealing with some type of guilt. And you may at surface level say, no, they're just, uptight, or no. Well, if you dig deeper, it could be that the person feels guilty that, they withheld information. They're holding a secret. They found out that their best friend is having an affair, but they can't tell the spouse. They found out something about their childhood, but they can't tell their parent. Or they're holding a secret about their child, and they can't tell their child. There's so many different things that we don't realize that people carry with them. And they'll say things like, I'm carrying this to the grave. And it just develops guilt, and that also develops anger because there's frustration, there's this sense of not having the control over it, because although you feel you have control over it because you're keeping it to yourself, it's really controlling you because it's making you feel angry, and you need to let it out. So the way we let it out, because we don't want to compromise the information that we have, We let it out by being irritable. We let it out by being short with people. We let it out by just being frustrated all the time. And we justify it by saying, oh, that's just the way I am. That's nobody understands me. That's just the way I am. And it's dangerous because it just builds and builds and builds with time. And we get smarter up here, but we get harder here. And that's where it becomes very dangerous. You don't want to get smarter up here. And for those listening, I'm pointing to my head, which signifies the brain, while getting harder down here. And I'm pointing at my chest, which signifies the heart. And that's, I think, the biggest difference between getting a hold of these deadly emotions and allowing them to get a hold on us. I will say that these deadly emotions, specifically guilt and shame, have been linked to diseases like MS, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, and chronic fatigue. And these diseases are autoimmune diseases. And what that means is that it's your body fighting itself. So when you look at it from that perspective, you realize that your body's fighting itself because you're allowing it to hold guilt and shame. You're allowing these emotions to live and reside rent-free in your body, and your body is saying, what are you doing? This is not healthy. This is not good. We need to process this. And because it doesn't know how to process it from an emotional standpoint, because that's your responsibility and my responsibility, it tries to process it from a physiological standpoint, which is just fighting and developing these cells to fight each other, and really it's fighting itself. And so these diseases that we develop are self-crippling and self-defeating. And we hear stories. For example, there's a story of a lady who her husband got really sick, and she would go visit him at the hospital, and he was getting better, but she would go and take him his food and visit him. And one day she goes to see him and he's not there. And when she asks the medical team or staff, where's my husband? The nurse that was taking care of him that day said, oh, his girlfriend came in and took him home. And so she immediately felt shame. She immediately felt like she was dumb, stupid. How could she not know? And then that also went to its first cousin, feeling guilty about not looking the same as this girlfriend that her husband now is having an affair with, because she was younger, she was thinner, all of these things that she felt she was not. And so guilt and shame now are residing in her, and she later goes to get herself checked out because she was having pain, couldn't finish the day without feeling exhausted, hitting a wall. She was constantly feeling pain in her joints, constantly feeling pain that she couldn't really describe to the doctor. And when this doctor specifically, this is Dr. Don Colbert, who wrote the book Deadly Emotions and talks about all of these things, she starts to share with him that I just don't know. I just feel bad. I feel tired all the time. I don't know how to shake this off. And Dr. Don Colbert is one of those few medical doctors that begins to ask her about what's going on in your personal life, but really listening to what she doesn't say. And basically, when she starts to share about her marriage and her situation at home, he begins to connect the dots, because she started expressing how she felt embarrassed that he left with this other woman, knowing that the medical team there knew that she was his wife. And then she felt guilty because she didn't take care of her body the way this other girl did. And so it leads to understanding, at least for Dr. Colbert, that this disease, she was then diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, was linked potentially to these emotions of guilt and shame that she harbored for years. And so he was able to get her psychological help and counseling. And later on, within a year and a half, according to his book, his story, we saw how the symptoms died out because she got the help she needed. She forgave. She was able to see herself in a better light. Her self-esteem was better. She had a healthier view of herself, and she rid herself of the shame and the guilt by confessing what she was thinking about this woman and about herself, and also by just not really caring what people thought because she knew who she was, and the decision that he made to violate the marriage and go with someone else was on him, not her. And so that began the journey for her of healing, not only physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. And so I just want to share with you the importance of why these emotions are to be dealt with so that they don't deal with us. And I will finish the episode by saying this. Our brain functions from a type A perspective, and our hearts function from a type B perspective. That means that our brain is wired to constantly develop, produce, work, to create, to get things done. It does not feel. Our brain wants to do what we tell it to do, what we program it to do. So a lot of times, these emotions that we're dealing with, we deal with them from a type A perspective, like the brain, and we use the brain and we reason and we say, it's okay, it's not a big deal. I'm not too worried about it. I got a career, I got a job, I got education to obtain, I have kids to raise. And so we try to dumb it down mentally, using our brain to just move forward with the work that we have to do. Our hearts are type B, which means that it wants to connect, it wants to thrive, it wants to develop deeper relationships, it wants to have a more meaningful way of looking at life. And so the benefit of that is that when we look at these emotions for what they are, then we won't rationalize and we won't try to justify why they're there. We will want to deal with them because we want to have longevity in the relationships that we want to build. We don't want that to be a hindrance, because what happens is when we don't deal with our emotions the right way or in a healthy way, they surface, they come back, they show up, they bring insecurity with them, they bring a compound effect of shame and guilt, and it projects into other relationships that we actually care about and we want to develop. So we need to understand how we work in terms of our brain being a type A and our heart being a type B. So if we're more sensitive to our type B aspect of our hearts, then we will make sure that we're dealing with these emotions so that they don't manifest themselves in our bodies and cause these different illnesses that are eventually they're killing us, and even if they don't kill us, they're just developing comorbidities in us, which in essence is killing us eventually. So be mindful of these deadly emotions. This all relates to our mental health, our brain health, our physical health, our emotional health, and obviously our spiritual health. So make sure that if you're dealing with these emotions, that you identify them as so and say, okay, I'm feeling guilty about this, I need to deal with it. I'm feeling shame about this, I need to deal with it. And I must get better at developing a stronger sense of myself. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. For more information, visit our website at juangarciaenterprises.com. Our host, Juan Garcia, is available for speaking, coaching, and one-on-one counseling. You can email us at info@juangarciaenterprises.com. Until next time, remember, we only have one mind, so mind yours.